Arrogant, she tore her dress thinking she was just the maid. But her millionaire husband saw the entire shredding of innocence. The sound was sharp, violent, and heart-wrenching, like thunder breaking the calm before a devastating storm. Crack! The echo of the fabric ripping silenced the murmur of crystal glasses and polite laughter filling the opulent dining room of the Hawthorne mansion. It wasn't an accident. It was a public execution, under the golden diffused light of the immense chandeliers hanging from the ceiling like frozen diamond tears. The scene seemed straight out of a high-definition nightmare. In the center of the room, surrounded by the excessive luxury of imported marble and floral arrangements costing more than a year's salary for any average worker, Fiona stood like an evil queen. Her crimson red dress, an exclusive design that clung to her body like a second skin, shone intensely, contrasting with the fury distorting her perfectly made-up face. Her eyes, lined with surgical precision, injected pure hatred toward the figure she had subdued. With one hand adorned with gold rings and rubies that sparkled with every abrupt movement, Fiona gripped Mary's long, shiny ponytail with brutal force. The young woman, barely 24 years old, had her neck twisted back at a painful angle, forced to stare at the fresco-painted ceiling while feeling like her hair roots were about to detach. But Fiona wasn't satisfied with physical pain. She wanted total humiliation. With her other hand, nails long and perfectly manicured, in blood red, she had just yanked viciously at the collar of Mary's modest blue uniform. The white lace collar that Mary had ironed with such care that morning now hung in shreds over her shoulder, exposing the pale, trembling skin of her collarbone. "Look at yourself!" Fiona bellowed, her voice dripping venom that chilled the blood of those present. "You're a walking disaster." Mary couldn't defend herself. She had no free hands to protect her face or try to break free from that iron grip. Her tense, aching arms were occupied with the most sacred task in the world, holding the twins, Lucas and Mateo, against her chest. The babies, dressed in immaculate white onesies, had reddened faces and open mouths in a silent cry that soon turned into terrified wails. They felt Mary's fear, her heart pounding against their tiny bodies like a war drum, and reacted with the instinctive panic of the innocent. The pain in Mary's scalp was sharp, stabbing, but the pain in her soul was infinitely worse. Tears welled up in her large, expressive eyes, sliding down her cheeks, unable to wipe them away. Her whole body shook, not just from the physical assault, but from absolute shame. Around them, the crowd of guests, the city's elite, men in dark Italian-cut suits and women wrapped in silks and jewels, watched the scene. Their faces were a mix of shock, morbid curiosity, and in some cases, cold indifference. No one moved. No one stepped forward. They seemed like wax statues in a horror museum, watching as the woman in red destroyed the young woman in blue. The soft, volumetric light, entering through the large side windows, bathing the room in a sunset tone, should have given the scene a romantic air, but at that moment it only highlighted the cruel contrast. Arrogant wealth against vulnerable humility. Fiona yanked Mary's hair once more, forcing her to step back, nearly losing balance. Mary held the twins tighter against her, closing her eyes tightly, praying they wouldn't fall, praying the ground would open and swallow her whole. "Please, ma'am," Mary sobbed, her voice broken, barely a whisper over the baby's cries. "The children are scared." Scared. Fiona let out a shrill laugh without releasing her. "They should be scared of having you near them. Look what you've done." With a final shove, Fiona released Mary's hair, leaving her staggering. The young maid had to spread her legs to steady herself and not fall to the polished floor with the babies in her arms. She breathed heavily, air entering her lungs with a hissing sound. The collar of her dress was ruined, her dignity shattered, and the silence following. Fiona's screams was heavy, dense, charged with an electric tension that made the air almost unbreathable. In the back of the room, behind the barrier of scandalized guests, a tall, dark figure watched, but Mary, blinded by tears and terror, couldn't see him. She only saw Fiona's contorted face and felt the crushing weight of her own powerlessness. The poison of high society. Fiona wasn't done. The silence in the room was her cue to begin the second act of her theater of cruelty. She smoothed her red dress with a theatrical gesture, running her hands over her hips as if wiping off the dirt from touching the maid, then pointed an accusing finger like an invisible spear straight at Mary's heart. "Look, everyone!" Fiona shouted, turning to the guests to ensure she had their full attention. Her voice resonated with the authority of someone who believes they own the world. "Look at this incompetent, this animal." Mary lowered her head, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into her own body. The twins, Lucas and Matteo, kept crying, their tiny fists clenched, pounding uselessly against their caregiver's chest, seeking comfort amid the chaos. Mary rocked their bodies, instinctively, whispering inaudible words of calm that she didn't even believe herself. "She's ruined my night," Fiona continued, circling Mary like a predator stalking wounded prey. She was serving a glass of red wine, a special vintage that Alexander kept for this evening. And this clumsy one tripped over her own dirty feet and almost spilled it on me. I had to dodge her to save this dress. It could have stained everything. It was a lie. A vile, calculated lie. Mary lifted her gaze for a second, her wet eyes full of disbelief. She wasn't even serving wine. She'd come down because the babies were restless and needed their bottles, and the kitchen was the only place she could prepare them. Fiona had intercepted her in the hallway, dragged her to the main room, and staged this out of nowhere. "Ma'am, I didn't," Mary tried to say, her voice trembling with panic. She knew her word meant nothing against the cousin of the late wife's patron, but she had to try. "I was just coming for hot water for the shut up." Fiona cut her off with a sharp scream, taking a threatening step toward her. She raised her hand as if to slap her, and Mary flinched instinctively, turning her body, so if a blow fell, it would hit her back and not the baby's. The protective gesture was so pure, so maternal, that some guests averted their gaze uncomfortably, but no one intervened. The fear of Fiona's status, her influence over Alexander, kept them paralyzed. Fiona lowered her hand, smiling with satisfaction at the terror in the girl's eyes. "Do you think anyone cares what a maid has to say?" Fiona whispered loud enough for those in the front row to hear. "You're a stain on this house. A shame. Alexander was too soft hiring someone of your class. Look how you have those kids crying. Dirty, probably infected with your misery." The cruelty of the words hit Mary harder than any slap. She loved those children. Since their mother died, Mary had been the only constant maternal figure in their lives. She went without sleep to watch over them, sang to them until they fell asleep. For Fiona to question her love and care for the twins was a dagger to the heart. "Don't you dare," Mary murmured, with a thread of voice born from the deepest indignation. "I care for these children as if they were my own." Fiona let out a mocking laugh, looking at the guests as if seeking complicity. "Did you hear that? As if they were hers," she mocked, bringing a hand to her chest in the gesture of false surprise. What audacity! A simple domestic worker thinking she's the mother of the Hawthorne heirs. It's pathetic. You're an opportunist, that's what you are. Slut. The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. The guests held their breath. The insult was so low, so vulgar for an event of that caliber, that it broke even the barrier of high society's indifference. There were murmurs. "That's too much," whispered an older lady with a pearl necklace, but her husband squeezed her arm to silence her. Mary felt her legs failing. Heat rose to her face, a mix of shame and impotent rage. She wanted to run, get out of there, hide in her small service room and never come out again. But she couldn't move. She was trapped in the center of the stage, under the bright lights, exposed and vulnerable. "I want you to kneel," Fiona demanded suddenly, her voice turning cold and cutting. "Right now, apologize for almost ruining my dress and for being useless. On your knees." "I have the children in my arms, ma'am," Mary pleaded, tears blurring her vision completely. "I don't care," Fiona screamed, losing her composure, her face red with anger. "If you don't kneel right now, I'll make sure you never work in this city again. I'll blacklist you. Your family will starve. Did you hear me? On your knees." The threat about her family was the final blow. Mary thought of her sick mother, the medicine she needed to buy, the rent they had to pay. She had no choice. Pride didn't pay bills. Pride didn't save lives. With a choked sob that seemed to break her chest, Mary began to bend her knees slowly. Time seemed to stop. The image was of infinite sadness. The young woman in blue, with her torn dress and two crying babies in her arms, descending slowly to the cold marble floor before the woman in red, who looked at her with triumphant contempt. It was the victory of arrogance over need, or at least that's what Fiona believed. No one noticed that at the entrance to the room, the figure of the man in the dark suit had begun to move. He didn't walk hurriedly, but with lethal determination. His steps were silent, but the energy emanating from him was like an electrical storm about to explode. Alexander had seen enough, and what he saw not only broke his heart, but awakened in him a fury that Fiona could never have anticipated. The knee on the marble and the silence of the accomplices. The descent was slow, an agony choreographed that seemed to last an eternity. Mary felt gravity become unbearably heavy, as if the very air in the room had solidified on her shoulders to push her down. Her legs trembled violently under the hem of her blue skirt, fighting against the natural instinct to flee, to run far from that mansion that had become a cage of gold and poison. But she couldn't run, not with Lucas and Matteo clinging to her chest, their little hearts beating in sync with her panic. When her knees finally hit the floor, the sound was dull, barely perceptible to others. But for Mary, it echoed in her ears like the roar of a collapsing building. The Carrara marble, polished to perfection, was icy. The cold pierced through her stockings and dug into her bones, a physical reminder of her position in that world. She was down on the cold floor, while they, the owners of the universe, looked down at her from above, wrapped in warmth and arrogance. From her new perspective, kneeling in the center of the room, the world looked distorted and monstrous. The guests' shoes formed a wall of shiny leather and stiletto heels surrounding her, shoes that cost more than she'd earn in 5 years of honest work. She could hear the whispers, a buzz of venomous bees circulating through the room. They weren't whispers of compassion. They were cruel judgments disguised as discretion. "What an unpleasant situation," murmured a male voice to her left. "These days, domestic help has no respect for anything," replied a woman, fanning herself with disdain. "Poor Fiona, having to deal with this at her own welcome party," commented another, complete, ignoring that the party was actually Alexander's business gathering, and Fiona had self-invited as hostess. Mary squeezed her eyelids shut, trying to block out the voices, but it was impossible. Hot tears rolled down her nose and fell onto the little heads of the twins, wetting Lucas's soft brown hair. He sobbed louder, feeling his protector's anguish. Mary cradled him, kissing his forehead frantically, whispering, "Shh, my love, shh. It'll pass soon." Though she knew it was a lie, nothing was going to pass. The humiliation was tattooing itself onto her soul. Fiona, satisfied seeing her victim reduced to a shrunken figure on the floor, stepped back to admire her work. She felt powerful, untouchable. For her, this wasn't cruelty, it was a necessary lesson. In her twisted mind, she was restoring the natural order of things. The rich command, the poor obey. With an abrupt movement, she bent down and picked up the white apron she'd torn from Mary minutes earlier. The fabric was wrinkled and ripped at one corner. "Take it!" Fiona shouted, throwing the balled-up apron straight at Mary's face. The fabric hit the woman's cheek and fell onto baby Matteo's arm. "Don't think you're going to stay there resting." Mary shuddered from the impact, instinctively protecting the child's face. "The floor," Fiona said, pointing to an imaginary stain near her own red heels. "You said you were going to clean, didn't you? Well, clean. Use that and clean the air you breathe, because even that's being dirtied by your presence." The order was absurd. There was nothing to clean. The floor was immaculate, but Mary understood it wasn't about hygiene. It was about submission. Fiona wanted to see her scrub the floor. She wanted to see her humiliate herself to the last degree. She wanted to break her so much that she'd never dare lift her gaze again. "What are you waiting for?" Fiona insisted, her voice rising an octave, bordering on hysteria. "Do you want me to call security to kick you out and leave those brats on the street?" Clean. Mary extended a trembling hand, briefly releasing Lucas to reach the fallen apron. Her fingers brushed the rough fabric. She felt dizzy. Fiona's expensive perfume mixed with the smell of floor wax and the sweet scent of desserts served at nearby tables, creating a nauseating mix that churned her stomach. She made a weak motion of scrubbing the floor, a parody of cleaning, just to appease the beast in front of her. Some guests let out nervous giggles. A young man with a champagne glass in hand discreetly pulled out his phone and took a photo. Mary saw the flash reflected on the floor and felt herself die a little more inside. Now her shame would be digital, eternal, shared in rich people's chat groups who laughed at others' misfortune. Harder, Fiona ordered, enjoying every second with sadistic energy. That's how you earn your bread, right? Scrubbing others' dirt. Never forget your place in this house, girl. You exist to serve, to bow your head, and to disappear when good people are present. Mary scrubbed the clean marble, her tears dripping onto the white stone, mixing with her useless effort. For Mom, she repeated, mentally, like a desperate mantra. Do it for Mom. She needs the surgery. Do it for the babies. Alexander would kill you if you left them alone. Hold on. Just hold on a little longer. But human dignity has a limit, and Mary was scraping the bottom of hers. The choked voice and the blow of injustice. Ma'am, please. Mary's voice came out like a broken thread, a plea that barely had the strength to cross the space, separating her from the patent leather shoes of the spectators. She stopped the absurd scrubbing motion and looked up, meeting Fiona's eye. There was something in Mary's gaze that wasn't just fear. It was a spark of desperation. The plea of a surrogate mother who fears more for her charges than for herself. The children are hungry, Mary continued, taking breath between sobs, trying to explain once more, trying to appeal to any trace of humanity left in that woman wrapped in red silk. They've gone hours without eating. Mr. Alexander left strict instructions about their schedules. I just need to go to the kitchen, please. I swear after that I'll do whatever you say. I'll clean the whole mansion if you want, but let me feed the babies. It was a mistake. Mentioning Alexander's name was like pouring gasoline on a forest fire. Fiona's eyes darkened, her pupils contracting with a mix of jealousy and territorial fury. How dare that maid invoke the name of the house's master? How dare she imply some kind of complicity or direct instruction from him? To Fiona, that sounded like intimacy. And intimacy between the millionaire and the nanny was her greatest fear. The phantom threat she wanted to exercise. You dare name him? Fiona hissed, crouching abruptly to be face to face with Mary. Her face was so close that Mary could see the layers of makeup covering her imperfections. Do you think Alexander cares about a lazy maid's excuses? He left me in charge of this party. I'm the authority here. But they're his children, Mary insisted, hugging the twins who, at Fiona's aggressive proximity, had started screaming again, high-pitched, desperate cry that pierced the ears. Shut your mouth! Fiona yelled. And then it happened. Fed up with the passive resistance, fed up with the crying, and fed up that the lesson wasn't ending with the absolute submission she desired, Fiona raised her hand. It wasn't a direct slap to the face. It was something more humiliating. With her palm open, she pushed Mary's forehead back with force. The gesture was brutal in its contempt. Mary's head jerked back from the impact. The push destabilized her. Since she was kneeling and her arms were occupied holding two heavy babies, she had no way to regain balance. Her body tilted dangerously backward. Ah! Mary screamed, feeling herself fall. In a supreme reflex act, she twisted her torso at the last second, sacrificing her own body to cushion the fall. Her elbow and shoulder slammed violently against the hard floor to prevent Lucas and Mateo's heads from hitting the marble. The pain exploded in her arm, a sharp lash that ran up to her neck. But she didn't let go of the children. She lay on her side on the floor, curled around the babies, panting from pain and terror. The room fell into sepulchral silence for a second, broken only by the now hysterical crying of the children. Even the most insensitive guests seemed to hold their breath. A line had just been crossed. Physical violence against a woman with children in her arms was something not even the most callous elitism could easily justify. There was uncomfortable movement among the crowd. An older gentleman took half a step forward, as if to intervene, but stopped upon seeing Fiona's manic expression. Fiona stood up, regaining her height, looking down at Mary's fallen body with contempt. She showed no remorse. On the contrary, she fixed her hair with arrogance. "That's what you get for being clumsy," she said coldly, shaking her hands. "You're weak. You're not fit for this job." "You're fit for nothing. Look at you lying on the floor like an animal. That's what you are." Mary didn't answer. She couldn't. She was focused on checking the babies. They're okay, she told herself, touching their little heads, checking their limbs. Thank God they were unharmed, just scared. But she was broken. She felt something inside her chest had torn forever. The hope that justice existed, that goodness meant something, faded with every second on that cold floor. "Security," Fiona called, snapping her fingers toward the room's entrance, without looking at anyone in particular. "Get this trash out of my sight and take the kids to the nursery. Have someone competent attend to them. This woman is fired." Two security guards, burly men in black suits who had been watching from the corners, hesitated. They knew Mary. They saw her every day walking the kids. They greeted her in the kitchen. They knew she was good. They knew this was an injustice. They exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to obey the guest of honor or wait for the boss. "Are you deaf?" Fiona screamed, losing patience, turning toward them with bloodshot eyes. "I said, get her out now, or do you want me to fire you too?" Mary tried to sit up, leaning on her sore elbow. The world spun around her. The humiliation was so complete, so absolute, that she wished she could faint. "God help me," she thought. "If you exist, please make this stop." No one seemed willing to save her. Cruelty had won. Fiona smiled triumphantly, believing she had crushed the last obstacle in her path to controlling the house and Alexander. She felt like the undisputed queen of the drama. But the victory of the wicked is usually noisy and brief. Just as one of the guards reluctantly stepped toward Mary to obey the order, the air in the room changed. It wasn't a sound, but a presence. A shadow projected over the group, long and ominous. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees at once. Alexander was no longer at the back of the room. He had crossed the distance with silent predator steps. He didn't run, because a man with his power doesn't need to run to be lethal. He simply arrived, and his arrival brought a gravity that made Fiona stop smiling instantly. He was there, standing right behind Fiona, so close that his shadow engulfed the red light of her dress. His face didn't show the explosive, vulgar anger of Fiona. It was something worse. It was an icy calm. The calm of the eye of the hurricane before total destruction. His dark eyes weren't looking at his late wife's cousin. They were looking at Mary, lying on the floor, protecting his sons with her own bruised body. And in that gaze was a promise of war. The intervention of the lion. The sound of Italian leather shoes hitting the marble stopped abruptly. It wasn't a gradual halt. It was a sharp, definitive military stop. The silence that followed was so absolute that the hum of the central air conditioners seemed like a deafening roar. Alexander Hawthorne was there, a tower of dark authority silhouetted against the festive room light. His physical presence was imposing, not just because of his height or the perfection of his tailored suit, but because of the energy he radiated, a mix of contained power and volcanic fury barely kept beneath the surface. His eyes, normally a warm hazel, were now two bottomless black wells fixed on the back of Fiona's neck. Fiona, sensing the atmospheric change like an animal detecting a predator before seeing it, turned slowly. Her triumphant smile faltered for a fraction of a second upon seeing Alexander's expression, but her arrogance was a thick shield. She quickly recomposed her mask of perfect hostess, assuming the Millionaire's. Anger was directed at the source of the problem, the maid on the floor. "Alexander, darling," Fiona exclaimed, her voice rising a tone to convey false cheer, trying to break the tension with superficial charm. How good you arrived! I was just about to handle this unpleasant situation. She took a step toward him, extending a hand to touch his arm, seeking complicity, seeking to validate her cruelty with the alpha male's approval. Don't worry about anything, she continued, pointing disdainfully at Mary's shrunken body. This incompetent almost ruined the evening. She tripped, almost spilled on me. And look, she has the kids a mess, crying in the middle of the party. But I already told security to take her out. Tomorrow I'll find a top agency to send us someone decent, someone who knows their place. Alexander didn't move, didn't accept Fiona's gesture, didn't look at her extended hand, didn't even blink. His gaze passed through her as if Fiona were glass, or worse, smoke. An irritating nuisance, but insubstantial. Get away, Alexander said. The word came out soft, deep, vibrating in the chests of everyone nearby. It wasn't a shout. It was an order said with such stillness that it was more terrifying than any yell. Fiona blinked, confused, her smile freezing into a grotesque grimace. "Excuse me?" she asked, letting out a nervous giggle. "I think you didn't hear me right, dear. I was telling this woman that I said get away from her," Alexander repeated. This time his voice rose just a few decibels, loaded with a metallic edge that cut the air. He took a step forward, invading Fiona's personal space with such contained aggression that she instinctively backed up, nearly tripping over her own heels. Now, he finished. The crowd held their breath collectively. The social elite, accustomed to polite dramas and backstabbing, had never witnessed such a direct, raw confrontation. Alexander Hawthorne, the man known for his iron control and business diplomacy, was about to lose his cool. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched shirt collar, and his fists were clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles were white. Fiona, for the first time, felt real fear. She didn't understand what was happening. Why was he looking at her like that? Why was he treating her like the enemy? She was family. She was the one putting order. She was the equal. She backed up 2 more steps, leaving a clear path between Alexander and Mary. "Alexander, you're making a scene over nothing," Fiona whispered, trying to save her image, looking at the guests with pleading eyes. "It's just the help. You're stressed from work. I understand. But don't talk to me like that in front of Alexander." He wasn't listening to her anymore. For him, Fiona had ceased to exist the moment she stepped aside. His world narrowed to a single focal point, the trembling figure on the floor, dressed in blue, hugging his sons as if they were all she had left in life. The king's mantle, the turn, the most powerful man in the room, the owner of the mansion, the tycoon whose decisions moved markets, then did the unthinkable. What no high society etiquette manual would ever allow. Alexander bent his knees with a fluid movement, ignoring the possibility of wrinkling his $10,000 suit or dirtying his knees with the invisible dust on the floor. Alexander knelt directly on the cold marble, lowering his height to be at the same level as Mary. The sound of gasped exclamations rippled through the room like a wave. "What is he doing?" someone whispered. "He's kneeling before the maid," murmured another. Seeing a Hawthorne on his knees was a historic event. Seeing him on his knees before the help was a social cataclysm. Mary, sensing the nearby presence, shrank even more. Her eyes were tightly closed, waiting for the yell, the firing, or perhaps another blow. Her mind was trapped in a loop of terror. Here it comes. He's going to take the kids. He's going to fire me. What am I going to do? The scent of sandalwood and fine wood, Alexander's signature cologne, flooded her senses, replacing Fiona's cloying perfume. "Mary," he whispered. There was no anger in his voice. There was pain. A deep, hoarse pain. Upon hearing her name pronounced with that softness, Mary opened her eyes. The first thing she saw wasn't an angry face, but hazel eyes full of devastating anguish. Alexander looked at her as if seeing a terrible accident for which he was responsible. His eyes quickly scanned her body. He noticed the bruise starting to form on her arm from the hit against the floor. He saw the disheveled hair where Fiona had pulled it. And finally, His gaze stopped on the neckline of the uniform. The collar was torn. The cheap blue fabric had given way to Fiona's violence, and Mary's bra strap was visible, along with the reddened skin of her collarbone where the other woman's nails had scratched. Alexander's jaw tensed so much it seemed his teeth would break. One of Mary's solitary tears rolled down her dirty cheek and fell onto Alexander's hand, resting on the floor near her. That drop was the catalyst. "Forgive me," he said, his voice breaking. Before Mary could process the apology, Alexander moved. With a delicacy that brutally contrasted with his size and power, he extended his arms. "Give them to me," he asked softly, referring to the twins. Mary hesitated a second, her maternal instinct screaming not to let go of her charges, but her trust in Alexander was stronger. With trembling hands, she passed Lucas and then Mateo. The babies, recognizing their father's scent and strong arms, lowered their crying volume, sobbing softly against the dark suit. Alexander turned his head to the side without standing and looked toward the shadow of a nearby column. "Robert," he called with authoritative but controlled voice. The head of security, a gray-haired man of absolute trust who had served the family for decades, appeared instantly, as if he'd been waiting for that order his whole life. He approached quickly, his serious face showing a mix of respect for his boss and pity for the girl. "Sir," Robert said, bowing, "take my sons to my private office. No one enters." "No one," Alexander ordered, handing the babies with utmost care to the guard's sturdy arms. "Call the pediatrician to check them. I want to make sure they don't have a scratch. And stay at the door. If anyone tries to enter, you have permission to use necessary force." "Understood, sir," Robert replied, taking the children tenderly and disappearing quickly down a side hallway, away from curious eyes. Now Alexander and Mary were alone in the center of the circle, without the babies acting as a barrier. Mary felt naked, exposed, without the children in her arms. The tear in her dress was more evident. Instinctively, she crossed her arms over her chest, trying to cover her shame, lowering her head to hide her crying. She felt like the smallest, most miserable thing in the world. Alexander saw her try to cover herself, and something broke inside him. Without hesitation, he brought his hands to his jacket buttons. With quick, precise movements, he unbuttoned the center one, removed the Italian wool jacket with impeccable cut, and was left in his shirt sleeves, his gray vest marking his athletic torso. The room went mute. A gentleman doesn't remove his jacket at a formal event unless it's an extreme emergency. With infinite tenderness, Alexander leaned forward and placed the jacket over Mary's shoulders. The fabric was heavy, warm, retaining his body heat. It was like a protective hug. The jacket was huge on her. The sleeves covered her hands, and the length reached her thighs, hiding the torn uniform, hiding the mark of servitude, hiding her shame. "Cover yourself," he whispered, and his hands lingered a second on her shoulders, squeezing gently to give her strength. "No one has the right to see you like this." Mary grabbed the jacket's lapels with her cold fingers, wrapping herself in his scent. For the first time that infernal night, she felt a spark of safety. She looked up, her large, wet eyes meeting his. "Mr. Alexander, I didn't—" She tried to babble, her voice shaking from shock. "Shh," he silenced her, placing a finger gently on her lip. "Don't say anything. You don't have to explain anything. I saw everything, Mary. I saw it all." Fiona, who had been watching the scene with her mouth open, unable to process what her eyes saw, finally snapped out of her stupor. The image of Alexander Hawthorne, the country's most coveted widower, kneeling on the floor, dressing the maid in his own clothes while sidelining the guests. It was too much for her ego. "But what the hell are you doing?" Fiona screamed, her shrill voice breaking the moment's intimacy. She stepped forward, pointing at Mary with a trembling finger from anger. "That woman is dirty. She's an employee. You give her your jacket? That jacket costs more than her whole family's life. Alexander, you've lost your mind. She's bewitching you." Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if gathering the patience needed not to commit a crime right there. Then, slowly, he stood up. He was no longer the concerned man consoling the victim. Now, standing, He was the Titan again. He straightened to his full height, adjusting his vest, and turned to Fiona. But this time, he didn't look at her as a nuisance. He looked at her as a judge pronouncing a death sentence. He extended a hand to Mary, who was still on the floor, wrapped in the giant jacket. "Stand up, Mary," he said, his voice resounding clear and strong for all to hear. It wasn't a boss-employee order, it was a man-to-woman invitation. "Give me your hand." Mary looked at Alexander's open hand. A large, strong hand, palm up. A hand offering salvation. She looked at Fiona, who glared at her. She looked at the guests, and then made a decision. She released one hand from the jacket and placed it on his. The contact was electric. Alexander closed his fingers around her small, work-roughened hand and pulled gently, helping her to her feet. There they were, he in his vest, she in a man's jacket over a torn maid's dress, together in the center of the room. "You think she's just an employee, Fiona?" Alexander asked, his voice loaded with lethal irony, turning to his late wife's cousin. "You're very wrong." "What are you talking about?" Fiona spat. "She cleans bathrooms, changes diapers. She's nobody." Alexander took a step toward Fiona, forcing her to back up again. "That woman," he said, pointing to Mary without releasing her hand, "has done more for this family in a year than you in your entire life. She held my sons when they cried for their mother. She nursed their fevers. She filled this house with warmth when it was cold and dead. And she's not wearing that uniform because it's her job tonight." Alexander paused dramatically, looking at the guests, ensuring every word etched into their memories. "She's wearing that uniform," he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone, "because you forced her, because you locked away her clothes, because you threatened and blackmailed her to serve at a party to which, I inform you, she was invited as my date." The crowd's gasp was audible. The secret had come to light. The revelation dropped like an atomic bomb in the middle of the room. Fiona paled until she looked like a ghost, her red lips standing out like an open wound on her white face. "What? How?" Fiona stammered. "That's a lie. She's lying. Lying." Alexander smiled, but it was a joyless smile, a wolf's smile. "Do you think I'm stupid, Fiona? Do you think I don't have cameras in my own house? Do you think I don't know what happens under my roof?" The trap had closed, and Mary, standing beside him, felt for the first time that the ground stopped shaking. The price of silence and the broken mask. Alexander didn't release Mary's hand. On the contrary, he interlaced his fingers with hers, a gesture of intimacy and protection so flagrant that it equated to a declaration of war against every social norm ruling that room. The warmth of his palm was the only thing keeping Mary anchored to reality, preventing her legs from giving way again under the weight of shock. "Cameras," Fiona repeated, her voice strangled, losing that false sweetness she'd perfected for years. Her eyes darted nervously side to side, seeking allies among the guests, but found only looks of morbid curiosity and confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about, Alexander. You're delirious. The grief over your wife's death has affected your judgment. You're defending a lying maid over your own family." Alexander let out a dry laugh, devoid of humor, that chilled the blood of those present. "Family?" he asked, taking a slow step toward her, drawing the entire room's attention with him. "You're not my family, Fiona. You're a distant relative of my late wife who showed up at my door 3 months ago, supposedly to help with the grief, but who has done nothing but try to rule a castle that doesn't belong to her." Mary squeezed Alexander's hand, fearful his anger would overflow. She wanted to whisper for him to stop, that it wasn't worth it, that she just wanted to go to her room and hide. But the words stuck in her throat. Alexander, sensing her fear, gave her a gentle, reassuring squeeze, without stopping his gaze on Fiona. "I'm going to tell everyone why Mary, the woman who has cared for my sons with more love than you could fake in 1,000 lives, is dressed like this," Alexander announced, raising his voice to reach every corner of the room. Fiona tried to interrupt, stepping forward with raised hands. "Enough. I'm not going to let you humiliate me in my own." "Shut up," Alexander thundered, and this time, the shout was so powerful that the crystal glasses on nearby tables vibrated. Fiona froze, mouth open. Today was Mary's birthday. I gave her the day off, bought her a dress, asked her, not as a boss, but as a man, to accompany me tonight. I wanted her to stop being the nanny for a few hours and just be herself. A murmur of astonishment ran through the crowd. The ladies of society covered their mouths with their fans, the tycoon Hawthorne inviting the nanny as his date. The scandal was delicious for them, but deadly for Fiona. But you couldn't allow that, could you? Alexander continued, lowering his voice to a venomous tone. You knew that if she walked through that door dressed in silk and not cheap cotton, everyone would see what I see. A beautiful, dignified, kind woman. And that terrified you. Because you need her to be the maid, so you can feel like the lady. Fiona was pale, sweating cold under layers of makeup. That's ridiculous. She put on the uniform because she knows her place. She babbled, but her voice lacked conviction. She put on the uniform, Alexander, interrupted relentlessly. Because you went to her room 2 hours ago. Because you found the dress I gave her and cut it with scissors. And because you threatened her with the only thing you know would destroy her. Mary closed her eyes, tears escaping again. She remembered the moment with painful clarity. Fiona bursting into her humble service room like a hurricane. Silver scissors gleaming in her hand, the blue silk of the gift dress falling in strips to the floor. You threatened her mother, Alexander revealed, dropping the emotional bomb. The silence in the room became dense, heavy. Attacking a sick mother was taboo even for the most ruthless in that circle. You told her that if she didn't put on that old uniform, if she didn't serve tables and clean the floor tonight, you'd fire Mrs. Clara, her mother, who works in the kitchens and needs this health insurance for her dialysis treatment. Alexander's voice trembled with contained indignation. You blackmailed a daughter with her mother's life to satisfy your sick ego. Lie! Fiona screams desperately, seeing her reputation crumble in real time. That's a lie. No proof. She's making up that story so you'll pity her. She's a manipulator, Mary sobbed, unable to hold back anymore. It's not a lie, she whispered so low only Alexander heard. I know, he responded softly, and I don't need your word to prove it, Mary. Alexander reached into his pants pocket and pulled out his latest generation mobile phone. With a fluid movement, he typed something on the screen and looked toward the huge 85-inch LED TV mounted on the back wall, meant to show family photos and relaxing landscapes during the evening. Fiona, Alexander said with terrifying calm, you forgot a small detail. A week ago, after noticing my sons cried every time you approached, I installed a new security system with high-fidelity audio in every room, including the service quarters. Fiona's eyes bulged. Pure terror replaced arrogance. She tried to run toward him, tried to reach the phone, but it was too late. Alexander, no, don't you dare, she screeched, lunging forward. But Alexander simply raised the phone and pressed send to screen. The screen of shame and final judgment. The huge black screen at the back of the room flickered once, twice, and then came to life with brutal clarity. The image was sharp, in high definition, showing the simple but orderly interior of a small room. A single bed, a nightstand with a photo of the twins, and a cheap wooden closet. The date and time in the upper right corner marked today, 6:45 p.m. All the guests turned to the screen, hypnotized. Fiona froze in the middle of the room, one hand extended toward nothing, like a statue of defeat. She knew what was coming. She wanted to scream. She wanted the earth to swallow her, but her feet felt like lead. In the video, the room door burst open. Fiona entered, but not the composed, smiling Fiona from the party. This was a Fiona, with her face distorted by anger, holding a navy blue silk dress in one hand and sewing scissors in the other. The audio filled the dining room through the high-quality surround speakers. Fiona's voice resonated with appalling clarity, eliminating any doubt. You thought you were going to dine at my table, you starving wretch, said the on-screen Fiona, throwing the dress on the bed and starting to snip it viciously. The sound of the fabric ripping in the video echoed the real sound of Mary's uniform torn minutes earlier. On screen, Mary appeared from the bathroom with a towel on her head, looking in horror. Ma'am, no, that's a gift from Mr. Alexander. the virtual Mary pleaded. I don't give a damn who gave it to you, screamed the digital Fiona, throwing the shreds to the floor and stomping them with her heels. Listen well, stupid. You're going to put on that maid rag that suits you. You're going to come down, serve drinks, and keep your mouth shut. But the sir invited me. I can't. If you open your mouth or dare look him in the eyes tonight, your mother is out on the street. The threat boomed in the party room, clear and cruel. I'll make sure she loses the health insurance tomorrow. Do you want to see Mrs. Clara die because her daughter wanted to play princess? The cruelty of the phrase was like a punch to the stomach for the audience. In the real room, gasps of horror were heard. My God, someone exclaimed. A man shook his head, looking at the real Fiona with absolute disgust. In the video, Mary started crying, falling to her knees, a premonition of what would happen later at the party. And nodding, I'll do it. I'll do whatever you want. Please don't touch my mom. That's how I like it. Submissive. Now get dressed and stop crying. You look horrible. Fiona spat the words before leaving the room and slamming the door. The screen went black. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer a silence of tension or social discomfort. It was the silence of judgment. 100 pairs of eyes fixed on Fiona. They no longer saw the elegant cousin, the socialite, the worldly woman. They saw a monster. They saw a cowardly abuser who attacked the weakest using power that wasn't hers. There you have your hostess, Alexander said, his voice cutting the air. The woman who wanted to give you lessons in class and etiquette. Fiona trembled violently. She tried to speak, tried to mount a defense, but nothing coherent came out. It was edited. She babbled, a pathetic excuse no one believed. I just wanted to protect you, Alexander. That girl is a gold digger. I did it for the family. For the family. Alexander took another step toward her, and Fiona backed up until she bumped into a banquet table, making the silverware jingle. You've just proven you're the greatest danger to this family. You indirectly threatened a loyal employee's life. You destroyed someone else's property and humiliated the woman Alexander paused a second, looking at Mary, who was still at his side with red eyes, but her head a bit higher now that the truth had freed her. He corrected his phrase, giving it the weight it deserved. You humiliated the woman I respect more than anyone in this world. The guests began to distance themselves from Fiona, creating an empty circle around her, as if she had a contagious disease. No one wanted to be near her. Her social capital had evaporated in 3 minutes of video. Get out, Alexander said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The sentence was final. But where will I go? It's night, Fiona whined, trying to play the victim card one last time. I don't care, he responded, cold as ice. You have 10 minutes to get your things from the guest room. If you're still here in 11 minutes, Robert will remove you, and I assure you he won't be as kind as I am. Alexander, please, we're blood, she begged, extending her hands. Blood makes you a relative, Fiona. Loyalty makes you family, and you have none of that. Alexander turned, giving her his back, ending the interaction forever. Go now. Fiona looked around, seeking a friendly face, someone to defend her, but found only walls of rejection. The lady with the pearl necklace, who had laughed at her jokes earlier, now deliberately averted her gaze. The man with the champagne turned his back. She was alone. Completely alone. With a sob of rage and humiliation, Fiona gathered the skirts of her red dress, which now seemed vulgar and excessive, and ran toward the exit, the sound of her heels hitting the floor like the tick-tock of a bomb that had already exploded. When the double doors closed behind her, the air in the room seemed to purify. Alexander sighed deeply, releasing the tension from his shoulders. Then he turned fully to Mary. She was still there, wrapped in his jacket, looking at him as if he were a being from another planet. I'm so sorry, Mary began to say, feeling guilty for the scandal. No, Alexander cut her off, taking both her hands in his. You have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who should apologize. I should have protected you better. I should have seen the signs. He raised a hand and with infinite tenderness brushed a strand of hair stuck to her forehead from the tears. Let's tend to that arm, he said, looking at the bruise. And then I'm taking you to dinner. Not here, somewhere else, away from all these people. But my uniform is torn, she whispered, ashamed. Alexander smiled, and for the first time in months, the smile reached his eyes. In my eyes, Mary, you've never looked more elegant than now, defending my sons with the dignity of a queen. But if it makes you uncomfortable... He looked at the guests who were still watching, now with a mix of respect and awe. I think this party is over. He turned to the crowd, regaining his commanding voice. Ladies and gentlemen, the evening has concluded. Please leave. My family needs privacy. No one protested. Alexander's authority was absolute, and the scene they had just witnessed was so intense that no one felt like continuing to drink champagne. Little by little, the room emptied, leaving behind the echo of a drama that would be told for years in high society. But for Alexander and Mary, in the center of that empty room, it was just the beginning of something real, forged in the fire of injustice and sealed with truth. The wounds that wealth didn't see. The silence that had fallen over the Hawthorne mansion after Fiona's expulsion wasn't empty. It was charged with a new, dense, almost overwhelming intimacy. The last guests had left, their luxury cars disappearing down the long gravel driveway, taking with them the judgment and scandal. Now the house breathed differently. Alexander guided Mary not toward the kitchen or service, areas where she had spent the last year being invisible, but toward the main oak staircase leading to the family's private wing. Mary, still wrapped in the oversized suit jacket, walked with hesitant steps. Her feet, in the black, simple shoes of her uniform, seemed to weigh tons on the Persian rug. Mr. Alexander, I shouldn't be here, she whispered, looking at the walls adorned with original artworks. She felt like she was profaning a sanctuary. Fiona's voice still echoed in her head like a venomous echo. Your place is to clean, not to live. Alexander stopped at the first landing of the staircase, turning to look at her. The light from the wall sconces illuminated his serious face, but his eyes had lost that icy hardness he'd shown in the room. I already told you downstairs, and I won't repeat it as an order, but as a truth. This is your home, Mary. And please stop calling me sir. After what happened today, titles are unnecessary. I'm Alexander, just Alexander. They reached the door of his private study, a room Mary had only cleaned under strict supervision. A place of business and cold decisions. But tonight, Alexander transformed it into a refuge. He opened the door and made her enter, seating her gently on one of the large leather Chesterfield sofas. Stay still, he said, heading to a dark wood bar cabinet, but he didn't take out alcohol. He opened a hidden compartment and pulled out a white metal first aid kit. Mary watched him, fascinated and terrified in equal parts, seeing the man who controlled a business empire searching for cotton and antiseptic with his own hands, the same hands that signed multi-million-dollar contracts, was a cognitive dissonance she couldn't process. Alexander returned to the sofa and sat on the coffee table in front of her at a lower height. Give me your arm, he asked softly. Mary timidly extended her left arm, pulling back the jacket sleeve. The skin, normally a smooth olive tone, was marked by an ugly blotch, a mix of purple and red where she'd hit the floor to save the babies. Alexander let out a ragged sigh upon seeing the extent of the bruise. His fingers brushed the edge of the bruise with extreme gentleness, as if touching a butterfly's wings. This, he began to say, his jaw tense. This is my fault. I allowed that viper into our home. I was so blind from my own pain, so locked in my work to avoid thinking about the loneliness, that I didn't see what was happening under my own roof. Mary felt the sting of the antiseptic as he began cleaning the area, but the physical pain was irrelevant compared to the warmth of his touch. You didn't know. She was your family, Mary said, trying to justify it because her noble heart didn't know how to hold grudges. No, he cut in, looking into her eyes while applying the cotton. You were the one protecting my family. You. While I was in meetings, you were the one hugging Lucas when he had nightmares. You were the one teaching Mateo to hold the spoon. Alexander stopped his hand and held Mary's wrist firmly. I heard the recordings, Mary. Not just today's. While Robert reviewed the system a few minutes ago, I heard other things. Mary lowered her gaze, ashamed. I heard how you sing them to sleep. I heard how you talk to your mother on the phone, telling her everything's fine here so she won't worry, even though Fiona made your life hell. Alexander's voice broke slightly. You're the bravest person I've known, and I treated you like just another employee. I am an employee, Alex. Sir, she corrected instinctively. Not anymore, he declared, placing a soft bandage over the injured arm and securing it carefully. Starting tonight, that's over. And about your mother, Mrs. Clara, right? Mary's heart skipped a beat. Fiona's threat about her mother's dialysis treatment still hung in the air like a Damocles sword. Please don't fire her. She's not to blame for anything. She works hard in the kitchen. She needs the money for Mary. Listen to me, he interrupted, cupping her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. His thumbs gently stroked her cheekbones, wiping away the dry traces of past tears. No one's firing your mother. Tomorrow morning, my personal secretary will transfer her medical file to St. Luke's private hospital. The country's best nephrologist is a friend of mine. She's going to get the treatment she needs as a VIP patient, and all expenses will be on me for life. Mary opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The relief was so intense, it made her dizzy. Why? She managed to whisper finally. That costs a fortune. Because you saved my sons from growing up with a stepmother who hated them. Alexander brought his face a little closer to hers, definitively breaking the professional barrier. And because, though it's taken me time to admit it, the idea of someone hurting you or yours is unbearable to me. It's not charity, Mary. It's gratitude. And maybe something more that I don't yet have the right to ask you to understand. The air in the study charged with electricity. Alexander wasn't the unreachable boss in that moment. He was a vulnerable man, offering his absolute protection. Mary, the girl who had arrived at that house with a suitcase full of used clothes and broken dreams, felt the wall between their worlds, the world of the rich and the poor, crumbling brick by brick under his gaze. He finished, bandaging her, and gently kissed the white cloth over her arm, a gesture of devotion that shook Mary to her core. Come on, he said, standing and extending his hand again. There are two little men I'm sure won't sleep if they don't see you one more time. The confession by the crib. The walk to the children's room was silent, but no longer tense. It was the silence of two accomplices who had just survived a war. Alexander walked beside Mary, not in front of her. He adapted his long stride to hers, making sure they were shoulder to shoulder. Upon reaching the half-open door of the nursery, they saw Robert, the head of security, sitting in a chair in the hallway, standing guard like a faithful dog. Upon seeing them, he stood quickly. They're calm, sir. The doctor already saw them. Not a scratch, thank God. And thanks to Miss Mary, Robert said, giving her a smile of genuine respect worth more than any medal. Thanks, Robert. Go rest. I'll take it from here, Alexander ordered. When they entered the room, the soft light from a moon-shaped lamp bathed the two white wooden cribs. The atmosphere smelled of baby powder and lavender, a balsamic contrast to the scent of expensive perfume and rotten ambition in the party room. Mary approached the cribs immediately. Lucas was sleeping with a fist in his mouth, but Mateo was awake, his big eyes moving restlessly. Upon seeing Mary, the baby made a soft gurgle and stretched his arms without asking permission, because in that territory, she was the queen. Mary leaned in and picked up Mateo. The baby sighed and rested, his head on her shoulder, closing his eyes. Almost instantly, the tension in the child's body dissipated at her touch. It was magic. Pure and simple maternal magic. Alexander stayed leaning against the doorframe for a moment, observing the scene. The image of Mary, still dressed in his jacket over the torn uniform, cradling his son with that instinctive devotion, hit his chest like a train. He realized that image was the only thing he wanted to see when coming home for the rest of his days. He approached slowly and stood on the other side of the crib looking at Lucas sleep, then raised his gaze to Mary and Mateo. They have your scent imprinted, Alexander murmured. Sometimes when I come home late from work and go in to kiss them, they smell like oatmeal soap and you. I used to think it was the smell of cleanliness. Now I realize it's the smell of home. Mary blushed, gently rocking Mateo. They're good kids, Alexander. They just need to feel safe. Their mother. She'd be proud of them. Mentioning the deceased wife used to be taboo in the house. Fiona used it as a weapon, but Mary used it as respect. Alexander lowered his head, looking at his own hands on the crib rail. My wife Elena, she was a society woman. She cared about appearances, parties. We loved each other, yes, in our way, but I never saw her look at the kids like you do. I never saw her throw herself to the floor to take a hit for them. Alexander looked up, and his eyes shone with brutal honesty. Today, when I saw you on the floor protecting them, I felt that if I lost you, I'd lose them too. I felt life slipping away. Mary felt her heart pounding in her throat. You say that because of the scare, sir. I mean, Alexander, it's the adrenaline. Tomorrow when the sun rises, you'll remember I'm the cook's daughter, and you're the company owner. No. Alexander circled the crib and stood in front of her, mere inches away. Mateo slept peacefully between them, a little bridge of peace. It's not adrenaline, it's clarity. I've lived in darkness for 2 years, letting people like Fiona fill the void. But you've been here silently, repairing what was broken without asking for anything in return. He raised a hand and caressed Mateo's cheek. Then his fingers slid gently to touch Mary's hand holding the baby. You're not going back to your service room, he declared firmly. That room is unworthy. I've ordered the East Wing guest suite prepared, the one with the garden view. Alexander, that's too much. What will the other employees say? She asked, the fear of gossip still rooted in her humble upbringing. Let them say the house owner has finally regained his sanity and is treating the most important woman in this family as she deserves, he replied without hesitation. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can leave through the same door as Fiona. Silence fell, but this time it was charged with an unspoken promise. Alexander looked at Mary's lips, then her eyes. There was desire there, yes, but above all, reverence. Mary, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I don't know how long it'll take you to heal today's wounds. I don't know how long you'll need to trust that I'm not like them, like those people who look down on you. But I have all the time in the world, and I'll spend it showing you you're not an employee. You're indispensable. Mary felt tears welling up again, but these weren't from pain. They were from release. I don't need time, Alexander, she responded with a bravery that surprised them both. I just need to know this is real, that I won't wake up tomorrow to find the dress torn and the door closed. Alexander closed the distance, leaning until their foreheads almost touched, with the baby sleeping placidly between their chests. I swear on my son's lives that you'll never find a closed door in this house again. His warm breath brushed her skin. This is your reality now, Mary, and no one will ever humiliate you again as long as I breathe. In the dim light of the children's room, surrounded by toys and innocent dreams, the millionaire and the maid didn't kiss. Not yet. The moment was too sacred, too fragile. But in that crossing of breaths and whispered promises, a pact stronger than any legal contract was sealed. The social abyss had closed, and on its ruins, something new and powerful began to be born. The call of death and the race against fate. The bubble of peace in the children's room, woven with whispers and promises under the moonlight, burst in the cruelest way possible. It wasn't a scream, but the vibrating, persistent buzz of Mary's phone, which she'd left forgotten on the changing table. The sound, mechanical and cold, cut the warm air of the nursery like a butcher's knife. Mary startled, almost waking Mateo, who slept on her chest. Alexander, with the sharp reflexes of someone always on, alert, reached the device before it rang again. He looked at the screen. It's from the kitchen, he said, frowning. It was 2 a.m. Nothing good could come from an internal call at that hour. Mary felt a sudden chill in her stomach, that sixth sense daughters have when something threatens their mothers. She handed the baby to Alexander with trembling hands and took the phone. Hello? Her voice was a threat of fear. Mary, come quick. The voice of Joanna, another domestic employee and her mother's roommate, sounded hysterical, choked in tears. It's your mom, Mrs. Clara. She won't wake up. She fainted in the bathroom and she's cold, Mary. She's very cold. Mary's world stopped. The ground beneath her feet, which Alexander had just secured with promises of stability, disappeared completely, leaving her falling into a black abyss. The phone slipped from her fingers and hit the carpet with a dull thud. Mary. Alexander grabbed her shoulders upon seeing her color fade, leaving her white as paper. What happened? My mom, she whispered, her eyes wide, looking through him toward the horror. She's dying. Fiona. The threat. The stress. Mom. Mary didn't wait. Instinct propelled her. She ran out of the children's room, forgetting protocol, forgetting she wore a man's jacket that dragged, forgetting everything except the woman who had given her life. She ran through the carpeted hallways, down the service stairs, jumping steps 2 at a time, her heart pounding her ribs as if wanting to escape. Alexander didn't hesitate a second. He placed Matteo carefully in his crib, kissed his forehead in a fleeting second, and dashed after her. When they reached the service quarters in the mansion's basement, the scene was infernal. Mrs. Clara, a 55-year-old woman with a face marked by hard work and kidney failure, lay on the cheap tile floor. Joanna was trying to revive her uselessly, crying loudly. Mom! Mary's scream was heart-wrenching. She threw herself to the floor, pushing Joanna aside, and took her mother's face in her hands. She was pale, with a bluish tint to her lips. She barely breathed. Mom, please don't leave me. Not now. Alexander entered the small, crowded room. His presence filled the space. He didn't freeze from the drama. His analytical mind took control. He knelt beside Mary, placed 2 fingers on Mrs. Clara's neck, and felt the pulse. Weak, erratic, almost non-existent. She's going into septic shock or heart failure, he diagnosed with firm voice, recalling first aid courses. No time for an ambulance. They'll take 20 minutes to get up here. We'll lose her in 10. He stood and looked at Robert, who had come running behind him. Robert, get the car. The sports car. It's the fastest, Alexander shouted. Then he bent down and, regardless of the effort or floor dirt, lifted Mrs. Clara in his arms as if she were a feather. Alexander, Mary sobbed, trying to help, but her hands shook too much. Open the doors, Mary. Run, he ordered. Not with cruelty, but with the urgency of a general in battle. The drive to the hospital was a blur of neon lights and engine roar. Alexander drove the luxury sports car with reckless skill, running red lights, honking, with one hand on the wheel and the other reaching back to squeeze Mary's hand, who sat in the back, holding her mother's head. Hold on, Clara. Hold on for your daughter, Alexander said, looking in the rearview mirror. I'm not letting you die today. Fiona won't win this. They arrived at St. Luke's emergency entrance, screeching to a halt. Alexander got out before the car fully stopped, yelling at the orderlies. I need a stretcher, now! Chronic renal patient in collapse. A security guard tried to stop him for parking the car wrong. Sir, you can't leave the vehicle there. Alexander turned, and his gaze was so fierce, the guard backed up 2 steps. I'm Alexander Hawthorne. That car is worth more than this whole building. Throw it in the river if you want, but bring a stretcher or I'll buy this hospital and fire you in 5 minutes. The authority of money and desperation worked. In seconds, a medical team surrounded Mrs. Clara and rushed her through the double-swinging doors. Mary tried to follow, clinging to her mother's limp hand, but a nurse stopped her at the threshold. You can't go in, miss. We need space to work. It's my mom, Mary screamed, struggling, kicking with the pain of a little girl. Don't leave her alone. Alexander reached her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, anchoring her to reality. Mary turned and buried her face in his chest, screaming, her pain wetting his white shirt, staining it with tears and mascara. She's going to die, Alexander. She's going to die because of the upset. Fiona killed her, she repeated between spasms. Alexander held her tightly, stroking her hair, bearing the weight of her anguish. He didn't tell her, everything will be fine, because he didn't want to lie. He told her the only thing he could offer. I'm here. I won't let you go. Whatever happens, Mary, you're not alone in this. Never again. The following hours were Chinese torture. The waiting room, with its white fluorescent lights and disinfectant smell, felt like a prison. Mary sat in a hard plastic chair, her gaze lost on the operating room door. praying every prayer she knew. Alexander didn't sit. He paced, making calls, pulling strings, ensuring the best specialists were in that operating room. At one point, Mary looked up. She saw Alexander disheveled, shirt wrinkled and stained, hair messed, talking on the phone with demanding tone. "Bring Dr. Valdez. I don't care if he's at a charity gala. Send my helicopter. I want him here in 15 minutes. Mary felt a pang in her chest that wasn't pain, but immense gratitude that hurt. That man, who could be sleeping on silk sheets, was moving heaven and earth for the cook, not out of pity, for her. "Alexander," she called softly. He hung up the phone and went to her instantly, kneeling in front of her chair, taking her cold hands in his. "Dr. Valdez is on his way. He's the best nephrologist on the continent. If anyone can save her, it's him." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her eyes full of new tears. "You could have just paid the bill and be done. But you're here. You're suffering with me?" Alexander kissed Mary's knuckles one by one. "Because the pain you feel, I feel in my chest." He looked at her steadily with an intensity that erased the hospital around them. "Because when I saw you cry at that party, I realized my life was empty until you filled it. And because I think I love you, Mary." The confession hung in the air, fragile and powerful. Mary opened her mouth in surprise, but before she could respond, the operating room doors burst open. The surgeon came out with his mask down and a tired face. Mary jumped to her feet, squeezing Alexander's hand, almost breaking his fingers. The moment of truth had arrived. Life or death, rebirth from the ashes, and the new contract. Dr. Valdez removed his surgical cap and sighed. The silence in the hallway was so thick you could hear the vending machines humming at the end of the corridor. Alexander wrapped his arm around Mary's waist, holding her physically, preparing to hold her emotionally if the news was devastating. It was tough, the doctor said, looking first at Alexander, then at Mary. The stress triggered a severe hypertensive crisis that collapsed her already weakened kidneys. "We had to revive her twice on the table." Mary let out a choked moan, bringing her hand to her mouth. Alexander tightened his grip, transmitting strength. "But," the medic continued, and that word was like a dawn, "we managed to stabilize her. She's a strong woman, very strong. She's responded to the emergency dialysis treatment. She's out of immediate danger, though she'll need intensive care for a few days. And well, Alexander, we'll need to talk about the transplant soon. But for tonight, she won the battle. She's alive." Mary's knees buckled, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming relief coursing through her body. Alexander caught her before she hit the floor, hugging her tightly as she broke into tears again. But this time it was a cry of release, of pure, crystalline joy. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she repeated against his chest. "Thank you, doctor," Alexander said, shaking the medic's hand firmly. "You have carte blanche. Whatever you need, ask for it. I want her in the best room. Private nurses 24/7. Let her lack nothing. It's already arranged, Mr. Hawthorne. You can see her in a few minutes when she wakes from anesthesia." When they entered the private room, which looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital room, Miss Clara was opening her eyes. She was surrounded by machines, but her color had returned. Upon seeing her daughter, she tried to smile. "Mommy." Mary ran to her side, kissing her forehead, hands, cheeks. "You scared me so much."
"Sorry, my girl,"
Clara whispered with a raspy voice.
"I worried too much."
"Fiona said she was going to fire you, that we'd be on the street." Alexander stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. "No one's firing you, Mrs. Clara," he said, with soft but firm voice. Clara opened her eyes in surprise upon seeing the great boss there, disheveled and with a stained shirt. She tried to sit up out of respect, the habit of years of service. "Mr. Hawthorne, forgive the trouble. I'll recover fast to get back to the kitchen." "No," Alexander said, approaching the bed and taking the older woman's hand with respect that left Clara stunned. "You won't go back to the kitchen. You've worked enough. From today, your only job is to recover and let yourself be cared for." "But sir, I need the job." "You're no longer my employee, Clara." Alexander looked at Mary and then back at the mother. "You're the mother of the woman I love, and that makes you my family. And in the Hawthorne family, no one works to death. It's over." Mary looked at Alexander, her heart pounding wildly. He had said it again, in front of her mother. It wasn't a moment of passion. It was an official declaration. Mary? Clara looked at her daughter, confused and hopeful. Is it true? Mary nodded, crying and smiling at the same time. Yes, Mom, it's true. The fear is over. Fiona is gone, and he's good. Alexander reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, the one Mary no longer wore, and pulled out a folded paper. It was something he'd been mentally writing all night and had drafted on a hospital sheet while waiting. Mary, he said, turning to her, I know it's not the most romantic moment here among heart monitors and alcohol smell, but after tonight, I don't want to wait another second to clear things up. He tore the imaginary paper representing the barriers between them. Your employment contract is rescinded right now. You're no longer the nanny, no longer the employee. Alexander approached her, taking her hands. I want to offer you a new position, a lifelong one. I want you to be my partner. I want you to be the official mother of my sons. Not just in heart. I want you to be the owner of my house and my life. Mary looked at him incredulously. Alexander, I have nothing. Just this torn uniform and my sick mom. I'm not from your world. You have everything my world lacks, he responded with vehemence. You have loyalty. You have love. You have courage. Money is made, Mary. Class is bought. But what you have? That's born. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. Do you accept trying to build a life with me? No uniforms, no fears. Mary looked at her mother, who nodded with tears in her eyes, giving her silent blessing. She looked at Alexander, the man who had saved the two people she loved most in one night. Yes, she whispered. I accept. The kiss that followed wasn't a Hollywood movie kiss. It was a kiss salty from tears, exhausted from stress, but full of unbreakable promise. It was the seal of a new destiny. 2 days later, the return to the mansion marked the true end of the old era. Alexander's car stopped in front of the main entrance, not the service entrance Mary had used for a year. The main entrance with its imposing oak doors and stone lions. The domestic staff was lined up in the foyer, a tradition for receiving important guests. There were murmurs, nervousness. They knew what had happened with Fiona. They knew about the hospital, but didn't know what to expect now. The chauffeur opened the door. Alexander got out first, impeccable again in his suit, but with a more relaxed expression than ever. He turned and extended his hand into the vehicle. Mary emerged. She no longer wore the blue uniform with white apron. She wore a simple but elegant cream-colored dress that Alexander had ordered for her. Her hair was loose, falling in waves over her shoulders, free from the tight ponytail service required. Upon seeing her, there was a silence of awe among her former colleagues. Alexander took her hand with pride, and they walked together to the entrance. At the threshold, he stopped and looked at Robert, Joanna, and the rest of the team. I want you to listen well, Alexander said, his voice echoing in the foyer. Mary no longer works here. She lives here. She is the lady of this house, and I expect you to treat her with the same respect and affection she has shown you all this time. Joanna, her mother's friend, was the first to break protocol. She smiled widely and gave a small clap that soon was joined by Robert, and then the whole staff. It wasn't an obligatory clap, it was a victory clap. One of their own had reached the top, not through ambition, but through kindness. Mary felt tears returning, but Alexander squeezed her hand. Welcome home, my love, he whispered. Mary crossed the main door threshold, leaving behind forever the humiliated maid, and entering her future as the queen of a home that was finally complete. Upstairs, in the nursery, the twins waited, and in the hospital, her mother healed. Divine justice sometimes takes time, but when it arrives, it does so with the force of a hurricane that cleanses all the pain of the past. To add a touch of American flavor, the story now unfolds in a lavish Hamptons mansion during a 4th of July gala, where fireworks light up the sky outside, symbolizing the explosive revelations inside. Mary, originally from a small Midwest town, brings homemade apple pie to the kitchen for the staff, a nod to her roots, while Alexander surprises her with a custom diamond necklace engraved with the twins' birthstones, representing their new family bond. In a creative twist, Alexander reveals he secretly funded a local charity for kidney disease patients in honor of Mary's mother, turning personal pain into community good, emphasizing themes of redemption and giving back.